Hello and welcome to today's panel. We are going to be talking about all of the ins and outs. Hopefully you had a chance to experience that incredible performance by Gaelynn. My name is Syrus Ware, and welcome to today's panel, No More Obstacles. I have the pleasure of being joined today by an incredible panel. I'll just tell you a little bit about who we're going to be speaking with. We're going to get into some questions and have a discussion, and we'll be able to take opportunities for you to post your questions, and we'll get to them to them if we can. But first, I'd like to introduce you to our incredible panel. Gaelynn Lea, who you just had the chance to experience, won NPR Music's Tiny Desk concert in 2016, and she has been on the road ever since, playing her unique mix of haunting original songs and traditional fiddle tunes. So far, the singer-songwriter and violinist has appeared in 43 states and 8 countries. She's graced the stage of renowned venues like Nashville's Music City Roots, the Kennedy Center, the House of Blues Chicago, and, while most often headlining her own shows, has also performed alongside Wilco, the Decemberists, and industrial rock supergroup Pigface. A little bit more about Gaelynn, performing with a unique style from her electric wheelchair that a creative music teacher helped her adapt. She holds her instrument like a tiny cello, looping classically trained rhythms and melodies with a memory man pedal to create symphonic cacophony that is both glorious in its reach and profoundly introspective. In addition to performing and recording, Gaelynn's speaking engagements cover disability rights, finding inner freedom, and accessibility in the arts. In recent years, she has used her music as a platform to advocate for people with disabilities and to promote positive social change, appearing on PBS NewsHour, BBC World News, The Moth Radio Hour, and through 2 widely viewed TEDx talks. Gaelynn is currently working on a memoir about her touring adventures and disability advocacy that she plans to release in 2022. Welcome, Gaelynn. Our second panelist is, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear that. Oh, mute. Great, we've got you. Welcome, Gaelynn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Cool, thank you.
And we have Christine Bruno, a US-based actor, teaching artist, disability inclusion consultant, MFA in acting and directing from the New School. Christine is a lifetime member of the Actors Studio, a teaching artist for the Queen's Theatre TFA program, Advisory Council's Queen's Theatre, and the New York Shakespeare Exchange. Selected theater credits include world premiere plays and musicals in the US and the UK. TV and film credits include US TV and award-winning indie features. SAG-AFTRA NY Board Chair and NY SAG-AFTRA Performance with Disabilities Committee member and SAG-AFTRA National PWD AEA EEOC committees. In March 2021, Christine will appear in the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Cost of Living at Toronto's Coal Mine Theatre. Welcome, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we have Luis Orbegoso, who was born in Lima, Peru, and is one of Canada's most in-demand Latin jazz percussionists. An honor graduate of the Humber College Music Program, he has performed and recorded with a slew of international superstars, including the Spanish Harlem Orchestra, Stevie Wonder, Jerry Gonzalez, Hilton Ruiz, Oscar de Leon, Hilario Duran, David Vireles, Chucho Valdez, Los Muñequitos de Matanzas, Giovanni Hidalgo, and Ralph Izari, Nelly Furtado, and many, many others. Luisito has far too many collaborators to list here, but has toured through Europe and Latin America and continues to work as a producer, a composer, and an arranger for many artists in Canada and abroad. So welcome to all of the panelists today. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so thrilled to be in conversation with you. I am a disability rights activist, an advocate, an artist, and I've been working trying to figure out how we diversify our fields, how we make the arts somewhere where all of us get to celebrate our practices, where all of us get to thrive. And one of the things that we know is that we live in a systemically ableist society that hasn't done a particularly good job at imagining all of us, imagining and expecting all of us in these spaces, in these environments. And so we're going to go through a little bit of a discussion here, a bit about just how we kind of tackle this and how we overcome this and how we do the kind of change making that needs to happen. So my first question for all of you is, of course, we find ourselves now in the middle of a pandemic. Some would say a pandemic within a pandemic within a pandemic. You know, as we grapple with the pandemic that is COVID-19, nestled within larger recognizing that, you know, we have systemic oppression that is sort of rampant in our society, that is a pandemic in and of itself. As we move through this pandemic, disability justice activists have noted that a lot of the access barriers that a lot of deaf, mad, and disabled artists face when we try to engage and practice our work seem to be magically resolved when everybody needed to participate in panels and discussions. Suddenly these questions of telecommuting seemed very, very possible. And suddenly it seemed like access was something that everybody was on board with. So what are some of the access opportunities that COVID has shown us is possible in the arts? What are we hoping lives on past this pandemic moment? What are some of the access things that you've seen come together and be made possible that you'd like to see continue in the arts? I think you're muted. Can't hear you. No. This is one of the great things, right? Is that one of the things that I think is so amazing is that we're getting to have this conversation at time virtually. And I am so excited about that. But then we have the tech things where we have to negotiate and navigate. As Gaelynn is getting the microphone going, is there anybody else who would like to think about this? Yeah. What are some of the access opportunities that COVID has shown us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Syrus? Okay, great.
Yes.
Sorry, it's very strange. The tech is very strange because I'm seeing a thumbnail of myself in real time, and then my square is delayed, and so I'm adjusting to that. So yeah, first I just want to take a moment to describe myself for those who may be blind and low vision who are tuning in. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a petite white woman, cisgendered, with cerebral palsy, and I have short curly brown hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a flaming orange wall. So, and I have AirPods, and so I can hear what everyone is saying. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of opportunities in this time. Definitely the one that you mentioned is probably the most prevalent, at least that I have seen, is that the sort of excuse of having to be in person in this physical space with people in order to do the work is gone away, right? We don't, because disabled people have been calling for the ability to do work remotely for years. And the excuse always has been, well, you need to be in the physical space. We can't, particularly as artists, right? There's no way we could do this work without everybody in the physical space at the same time. Well, we've seen that is, patently untrue. Unfortunately, I feel like now that it applies to everybody, it's a possibility, right? even though we are the largest minority in the world, we you know, people didn't think it was possible and magically until it applied to them. So now that it applies to everybody, oh, it's suddenly possible, which is great because it's also opened up opportunities for our work and for disability justice to reach wider audiences like this. Like Global Toronto would have been an in-person conference that probably most of us would not be at or not be listening to or watching right now. And so it's you know, for us, it's great. For the disability community. In the U.S., we just celebrated this weekend the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so many, there were so many online festivals, everything went virtual. And I've heard from people all over the world who were able to tune in. And like, this is the first time I've gotten to see Gaelynn perform was over the weekend at some of these festivals. So now I've been able to see Gaelynn perform for 3 times in the last week, when I had never seen her perform before, even though I knew who she was and she was totally on my radar. I never got a chance to see her perform. So I think just the exposure, which is actually what a lot of what we're talking about, is a huge opportunity for us in this time.
And thank you so much for those reflections. And I think it's, I mean, we wouldn't even be in this conversation in this way if not for, you know, these kinds of adaptations and the kinds of possibilities that have been made, the opportunities. So what are some of the other things, maybe, Gaelynn, I think we've got your mic now, and Luis, what are some of the other, yes, we can hear you. What are some of the other opportunities that COVID has shown us is possible in the arts?
Do you mind if I go? Is that all right?
That would be wonderful.
To say something?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I guess for me, what it has helped with is just thinking about access. So I'm an independent artist, right? Like I don't have a agency behind me and I do all my own booking. And a lot of the shows I play are pretty small. And so little venues where things like ASL interpretation are not automatically included. And I started realizing, but first I will explain what I look like. I always have to remember to do that right away. So yes, I'm like, not again. My name is Gaelynn and I am a small white woman with my arms and legs are shortened. And so I sit in an electric wheelchair to get around, and I have medium length dark brown hair. It's getting longer by the month without haircuts. And I am wearing black feather earrings and a black and white polka dot dress, and I have a white flower in my hair and some green wings. You can see the tip of them on the back of my wheelchair, and I'm in my kitchen right now. So that is my visual description. Yes, but I was realizing that, especially after just kind of thinking about how all of these oppression issues that we're fighting right now intersect, that I really need to do everything in my power to be accessible, like at my shows. And so it was something that I struggled with. About 2 years ago, I made a commitment to only play at wheelchair accessible venues, which limits where you can play to some extent, but feels much, much, much more authentic on my end. So, and then I also stopped having venues lift my wheelchair up onto the stage. So if they don't have a ramp, I just play on the floor. And so I had already made those adjustments, but I hadn't really committed to having ASL. I mean, because it's cost prohibitive for an artist my size. A lot of times ASL interpreters cost as much as I make or more in a show. But one thing that these virtual shows has allowed me to do is captioning is actually pretty affordable. And so for the first time last week, I do a live show every Sunday afternoon. And the first time last week, I had captioning, and I think I'm just going to do that from now on, basically, because I was like, you can't say you're pro access and not have those systems in place. And now I'm just trying to brainstorm ways when I go back out into the world, how to provide similar access to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And then getting better at things like vision descriptions and like just all these ways that we talk about access, but when you're on the road and you're booking your own shows and you're going to city to city to city, maybe you didn't have time to really analyze all the little ways that there might still be barriers in your own performance. And I think it's been a good time to reflect. And what I want to see carry over is this awareness that virtual does, as Christine was saying, that virtual does allow people who maybe couldn't gather physically in a space to be involved. And not only do I want to keep doing a virtual show like once a month or something, even after everything goes back to the way, what the new normal will look like. But I also think just remembering to include digital opportunities even in venues is like a thing that I would like to see continue well beyond COVID. So those are my brief insights. And just the idea that like one thing that I didn't expect is I do shows on YouTube, as I said, every week. And the comments from people, they get to interact with each other from all over the world. So people at my shows are not just interacting with me and maybe putting a comment up that I see and then I can talk about, but they're talking with each other. And I think there's this new kind of community forming around music, especially when it's done live online, that people can interact with the artists and each other in a way that they couldn't do at another kind of show. And I think that that's really, really cool. And so I don't want to let that go just because of COVID. It makes everything feel more connected in a way. So
thank you so much for those reflections. And I think, it's so the risk and the responsibility that you take in saying, no, you're not going to lift me up on the stage. No, I'm going to perform on the, and really holding the venues accountable while at the same time creating all of these accessible opportunities for people to engage online is just such a beautiful way to try to push for systemic changes. While at the same, we're going to get into some of the systemic issues in a minute. But yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to take a minute to describe myself. I am a trans Black disabled man. I have long, 4.5 feet long blonde dreadlocks. I have clear glasses. I have brown skin. And I have sort of an unfortunately not very growing mustache that I'm working on as my COVID project. So that is me. I'm Syrus. Luis, would you mind describing yourself? And do you have any insight into some of the things that you'd love to see stick around after success that we've developed now?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
yes.
Okay. I am, as Syrus said in the beginning, I was born in Lima, Peru. I've been living here for 46 plus years in between Montreal and Toronto. I am approximately 5'9" and very gray, kind of hair, sort of, the age is, you could see the age. some parts of my head. But yeah, just I'm really happy to be here, and I wanted to get right into this. Just by starting saying that I agree with 100% with what Christine said. Basically, we're all kind of exposing ourselves in a way that we haven't because of the facility, how the internet and the technology has facilitated us to do certain things that we weren't able to do physically because of motor skills, or as in my case, maybe low vision. And now in our own environment, we can project what we do very naturally. And well, in some cases, maybe not so naturally. I'll just go and say that I'm now including videos in my productions, which I haven't before. And I'm just learning about this. In these last 4 months, it's been quite a learning curve as far as video goes, positioning myself. I like to do things live. I don't like to generally play on top of recorded performances because I know for a fact logically that it's not going to always sync up. Like every performance is different. Even if you play the same song or the same piece, it's always going to come out different, and the audio and the video might not line up. And that's always been like a pet peeve of mine when I know like people are overdubbing in a show, like there's been a live recording, and then I could tell when there's an overdub or an artificial replacement or a fix or an edit. It's always been a pet peeve of mine. So I'm trying to keep everything live. And so I set up my studio. I put the phone on a stand. I mean, it's very primitive, but they're baby steps for me that I've been able to do. So I think in other people's experiences, I'm sure they've had to adjust and think outside the box and grow because of this. And I think after the COVID, this is going to stick around, because I remember the days when I was first starting or first being introduced to the recording world and how the media was presented in cassettes and CDs. The recording industry relied on a technology called DAT tapes, DAT machines, and then that slowly faded into computer recordings, software, digital audio software programs, stations, workstations, Pro Tools, Logic, Cubase, etc. And very few people are working with the older technology now because it's not as accessible. I mean, it's basically the Hummer, it's like the high-end technology. If people want to splurge or be, spend on a little bit of luxury, maybe going back into the old technology. But I think that's another topic of discussion. I think now commonly, and it's a lot more accessible, this newer technology has stuck around since it began. And I think this way of working for us, post-COVID, it's gonna become the new way of working and the new way of presenting product.
Thank you so much. And I think, yes.
Is it okay if I just add something here? Because I think it's important, jumping off of what Gaelynn and Luis just said, that the interesting thing that I see in this time is that, disabled people and deaf folks and mad people we have been forced to adapt to a society that was not built for us and is often hostile to us. So we've been doing this stuff like our whole lives, and we are the experts at adaptation, because we've had to be, because the onus has always been on us. And I feel like that's a big change in the world right now. Like, everyone who's not used to moving in a society that's not built for them is kind of scrambling. And so we're kind of, even though obviously we have to adjust as well, a lot of my disabled friends are like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for years. I got this. This is no problem. This is, being in the house for 4 months because I have an autoimmune disease is like no big deal. I have my setup and everything, so I think it's an interesting thing that the playing field has been leveled in such a way that everybody sort of is starting from zero. And I hope that continues. I hope that when we are able to go back to being in shared spaces, that all of this doesn't fall by the wayside.
Yes, and I think that that's such a beautiful point about this idea that, this is a situation we found ourselves in where people were turning to disabled people, to mad people, to deaf people and saying, how do we do this? Because of course, for many of us, I have 2 autoimmune diseases. For many of us, life has always been creating from bed. Life has always been creating from home. Life has always been figuring out ways to reach out because of a world that wasn't exactly welcoming as soon as we leave our doors, right? So I really thank you for bringing that in. Gaelynn, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure.
Well, yeah, just the idea that I think, at least for me, I have become more vocal with my local politicians. Like, we didn't have a mask ordinance in our city until me and many other people were really, really, really vocal about it. And it's making me realize, I think that one area that disabled advocates probably need to keep on is their local elected officials, so that some of these ideas don't just die on the vine. Because I do worry, like there's grocery delivery now in my town, but I want it to stay around for other reasons. Like, I never had a good luck getting to the grocery store and getting what I needed. And so just like, but without, when I call these elected officials and we talk about these issues, a lot of them really had no idea. So they see it as a COVID accommodation, but they don't actually think about the crossover. So it's up to us, unfortunately. Once again, the onus is on us to make sure that people understand that this is actually helpful. And I think people are more receptive now to the idea of being inclusive, but they don't necessarily know what that looks like. So it's not just an arts issue, it's like a political issue that we have to carry these accommodations forward and make it really clear why they matter. At least that's how I am seeing it play out in my hometown in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think that is, I want to move us into a question around structures, because I think that is, what you're pointing to is there are structural issues in our society that radically need to change. So one of the things that I've loved, that rallying cry that we've heard, the future is accessible. I've loved that. I have a t-shirt that says the future is accessible. Yep. I believe that the future will be accessible, but access for whom? So in the arts, when we talk about access, we often limit the conversation to audience, right? So how do audiences come and engage with our work? And the conversation about the producer, the sound engineer, the singer, the cellist who's disabled, deaf, or mad doesn't get it isn't included as part of that consideration of access. So it's always focused on audience. What we're doing here is we're saying no, as artists, as arts practitioners, as musicians, as people in the music industry, what does access for us look like in the future? So I want to know about some of the structural changes that you think need to happen in our future. So to make this accessible future where we all have what we need to produce our work, to survive and thrive, what are some of the structural changes that you think need to happen in the arts that would bring about a kind of accessible future for all of us? So I know for me, I just have been thinking a lot about some of the structures of white supremacy and how those play out in the arts. That's something that would radically need to change in an accessible future. But I know that there are other things that organizations, institutions, festivals need to be thinking about the structure of their organization and how the structure could change to be welcoming and open for all of us.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is being a little more creative about what is nonprofit and what is for-profit. So, and what I mean by that is, okay, so as an artist who can't access many venues, especially not the stage or the green room, I called, one time I was trying to play at a venue. I was opening for that band Pigface, and I was trying to get a ramp to the stage or a lift, like a rental, right? And it's about $1,000 to rent one. It's $9,000 to buy one, right? So $1,000 to rent it. And I was reaching out to every arts organization I could find to say, is there not a grant where they could, like, at least for this show, like rent one of these stage ramps? And they're like, oh no, it's a for-profit business. But the ironic part is I am an independent artist who is limited by the lack of access, which, I mean, in the U.S. it is a legal requirement, but it's not enforced enough to be realistic. And so for what I think disabled artists need is the support of these nonprofits. It was funny because one of them was like, yeah, we just got an access grant and it's only $200,000. And I was thinking, do you know how many ramps you could build with $200,000? Like, I can't even explain. Like, you could probably make every venue in the northern part of Minnesota accessible. But the sad part is they see it as helping for profit and not seeing it as helping the artists who are marginalized and oppressed by like the lack of access. And so it's just expanding the view of like what does an accessible society look like. And like, I know that we want to hold businesses accountable because of the ADA, but on the other hand, how long do I have to sit and not be able to play events because nothing is happening and there's funding available that's not being used for a very tangible purpose? And so I just think expanding the idea of like, what does a nonprofit always do and what does a for-profit always do? And maybe for-profits can have like Kickstarters and make like I just think maybe that's not, well, I guess it is a systemic issue. I actually, I don't know, I do wonder this idea that we divide everything between the nonprofit arts and the for-profit arts often leaves the actual artists out with no real support. That's how I feel. And probably you both have other things to add to that.
Yeah, and I just want to, I pick up on what you mentioned a good point about, just because something is the law, the unfortunate thing with something that, is a sort of a legal requirement is that it's usually people who are most in need of that policy or legislation who are going to benefit it from the most, who end up having to do the labor of pushing for it to be enforced. Right. So these things aren't just naturally enforced by a society that is systemically autist, sanist, and ableist, and instead it's people who are most in need of that policy change, that law, that legislation, the people who are the most vulnerable, who often end up having to push and say, actually, it's the law. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that. And I think I want to open it up to the other panelists. Yeah. What in this sort of future where we've addressed systemic ableism, autism, and sanism, in this accessible future, what are the structural things that you think would need to happen now in order to make an accessible future?
Well, I mean, the thing about the expenditure of my friend Claudia Alec calls it a disability tax, which is the expenditure of labor to do something that you're not being paid to do. Like Gaelynn is being paid to play her music. She's not being paid to advocate for herself or others, right? So we're often, I'm always asked to provide free labor. Always asked to provide free labor. When I go and do a show, I'm an actor, so I show up at rehearsal. Often I'm the only disabled person in the room, or one of the only disabled people in the room. And so automatically I'm expected to educate for no money. Like, that's a separate job. If you see my description, like, that's an actual separate job that I should be paid for, right? So we shouldn't have to, onus should not be on us to have to advocate for ourselves. And that goes with any marginalized community, not just the disability community. It goes for the trans community. It goes for, the folks of color. It goes for all communities. Like, we should not have to advocate for ourselves and our community in that way while we're practicing our art, right? So there's that. But I have in recent times pushed back on even using the term access necessarily, unless I'm using it in tandem with a bunch of other terms, because particularly in this country, when we use the term access, I feel like people, their brain stops at physical access, the accessing of physical structures. They don't think about the equitable, like, what I want is disability equity. I want Gaelynn and Luis to be on a level playing field with their non-disabled fellow musicians, right? I want that in all. For me, the future is like, it doesn't matter whether you have a disability or whether you're trans or whether you're a person of color. None of that matters. Like it matters because it's an identity. It's an important to us, but it doesn't matter in terms of access. Do you know what I mean? Like programmatic access. And it only matters in the function of our lived experience and what we bring to the table as disabled people, as deaf people, as mad people, as trans people, as people of color. Like, it only matters in the function of our art. It shouldn't matter in the way that we move through the world in terms of access to services and access to people, to ableism, right? So for me, that's sort of where my thinking is leading. Like, I want programmatic equity. I want structural equity for physical spaces. I want the principle of, in this country, nothing without us. It used to be nothing about us without us, right? But we've moved into a nothing without us paradigm, which means that we should have a seat at every table every time, whether or not we are discussing disability or whatever, topic we're discussing. All of us should have a seat at every table.
Yeah, and I think that this question of ensuring that at some of those tables where the decisions are being made, the board tables, the governing council tables, that we are at those spaces. And again, if you're inviting us in for our expertise, disability inclusion consultant is a separate job title from the artists that you've invited to perform. And I really just want to hammer that one home to the seats in the back. For anybody who's listening and watching right now, when you're inviting and hiring these brilliant folks, please know what you're inviting and hiring them for, and ensure that you're paying them for actually all the things that you're asking. Louise, do you have any ideas or anything to add to this conversation about what kind of structural changes you'd like to see happen in the arts?
I'm going to be a little bit selfish on this one because I've been so frustrated with a particular issue that I have with my work experience, my workflow. And I appreciate, believe me, I appreciate what's been said right now. It really means a lot that actually these kind of things have been put into words. Sometimes I have a little bit of trouble. Like I think of these things, but I can't really express them, or I haven't been that successful. So I appreciate all these comments. And for me, basically I work a lot with, now I'm working more and more with digital software, audio software, and some of these platforms aren't completely accessible. So I'm trying to raise awareness regarding this on behalf of all the other visually impaired producers, sound engineers that face this barrier where sometimes they can't really navigate around a certain program because there's not code written for that in terms of screen reader support. And it's been frustrating because I know some of the technology out there, I don't have complete access to it yet. It's improved over the years, and I'm hoping that it'll still continue, although I've run into some certain barriers when it comes to requesting for this kind of implementation. And that's basically, I mean, all I'm doing now is just working in the studio, and this is basically the most frustrating thing for me is to expand on the functionality of the digital side of working.
Thank you so much for bringing that. And I just want to, I think that when they talk about, programs being user friendly, they often, again, aren't imagining all of the people who are going to be actually using the thing. So thank you so much for bringing that, Louise. Gaelynn?
I was just going to add is that I recently got to hear Judy Heumann speak, and she's kind of like the mother of disability rights in the U.S. And she said, and I don't know how structural ableism is real, obviously, because I had never thought of this, but she said programs shouldn't be allowed to launch until they have accessibility features built in. Like, you shouldn't legally be allowed to sell a software that isn't compatible with a screen reader in the US because of the ADA. And I don't think I've seen that yet. Like for StreamYard, for example, which is the program I use to stream, I really like it, but the only way to do captions is direct onto YouTube because they have no integrated caption software. And so I can do captions, but it should just be something that, like, okay, what do you have for captions and what do you have for screen readers? Because you can't sell it if you don't have those things built in. And how big of a change would we see in our society for access if that was part of the requirements? I don't know. It just seems like it would help a lot. What do you think?
Yeah,
I mean that's why.
Sorry. Also, I think it's going to benefit. Sorry, it's going to. It's going to benefit the developers because they're going to expand on their market. And all the people, the users are going to grow, and it's a win-win situation.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also why we need a seat at every table. Because if there was a Louise in the room, Louise would be advocating for that, right? So that's why we need to be in every room, contributing to every conversation. It also brings up the unfortunate. I don't know if it was the same in Canada, but like in the early 2000s, like everyone was talking about universal design, right?
Right.
With the understanding universal design is going to serve everyone. It's going to serve disabled folks. It's going to serve seniors. It's going to, you know, with the understanding that eventually everyone is going to, this is the thing that we like to say in the disability community, disability is the one club that anybody can join at any time, right? So,
Yes.
so you can be a member, you can be totally intersectional and be a member of a million other communities, but disability is the one that you can join at any moment, right? So for me, like the push toward universal design in the early 2000s was amazing because it was sort of answering that call. And then we just kind of, it fell apart in this country anyway. So I think I'd like to see us get back to a more sort of holistic global view of like, what does this actually mean and who's it going to serve? Like I was listening to a podcast the other day about the ADA and curb cuts, which were instituted because of the ADA, right? But who else uses curb cuts? You know, people with groceries, people with stroller, you know, moms with babies. So like that's like the proof right there. If you just open it up, people, if the stuff that Luis and Gaelynn are talking about in terms of the accessible digital technology to make the music they make, that's going to benefit everybody. You know,
especially if we talk about it that way.
Yeah. Until we have non-disabled allies saying those things, it's like saying like, okay, yeah, let's do that. I can benefit from that too. I'm not disabled, but I can benefit from that too. You know,
and we could be teaching seniors like how to use screen readers or like captioning. Like we could teach people how to do that before they acquire disabilities in older age, and like really unite the disability and the elderly population, which I really feel is like long overdue in America. Anyways, I don't think we. Like my grandma, I remember she couldn't drive anymore and she was like so sad. And I was like, Grandma, you can take paratransit. Like I do it. Here's how you do it. And she didn't see herself in a position to benefit from something that she definitely would have. But it was because we haven't bridged that gap between like older people and disabled people. And we could be. And then all of a sudden it benefits everybody. You know, all those things would be like essential. Anyways, what were you going to say, Syrus?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is this idea that our liberation is necessarily tied up with one another's, you know, that we need an intersectional analysis so that we're thinking about elders, we're thinking about young people. I mean, there's this idea of us all being tabs, temporarily able-bodied, right? As you say, this disability is the club that you can join at any time. And you know, that this idea that when we create these accessible changes, that they actually are beneficial for everybody. And this is what we see with, you know, the push from disability justice saying, you know, we take care of each other, you know, that the things that we are creating are actually useful for everybody. Everybody benefits from online access. Everybody benefits from not just being able to walk upstairs to get to a stage. Everybody has reasons for the kinds of things that we're creating. I know that we only have about 15 minutes left, and I want us to get into a little bit of a nitty-gritty about what you think, what you'd love audiences to take away and to go and work on, because I know that we've been in a point of talk, and I think that for a lot of disability artists, disabled artists, mad artists, deaf artists, you know, the point for talking is over. We're really interested in action, and I know that there's a lot of people who are listening right now who are engaging in the panel, who are reading the captions, who are saying, yes, I actually am in a position to make something happen. I have the position to act on this. And I would love to hear a little bit of what you would love people listening to this panel would go away and do. But before that question, we have a question from the audience, and I just wanted to pick your brains on this one. They want to know, when you're working in an improvisational context, where it isn't scripted, do you have any strategies for helping to make that accessible? And then we'll get to the what you want people to take away. But if anybody has any ideas on how to make improv work accessible, so something that maybe you couldn't give the scripts to the ASL interpreter in advance because you don't, for example, know what the person is about to say because it's improvisational or etc. That was a question from the audience. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, otherwise I suggest we go into what you want people to do.
this is the thing is improvising means risk taking, and I actually happen to I've been I grew up basically taking risks. I don't necessarily follow convention all the time, and I end up doing certain things my own way. So I apply that to life, and it's just taking risks. And sometimes you're going to fail, and hopefully most of the time you'll succeed. You're going to exercise your intelligence, your intuition, and it's going to help you grow. So improvisation is actually a cool thing. So yeah, I mean, there will be those times. So just be ready. Always be on the lookout.
Thank you.
I think from an access standpoint, in terms of the question, from a text-based standpoint, I mean, I totally agree with what Louise said. Just like as a life strategy, not even an artist strategy. Like that's that's important. But I think textually, like I think having the situation set up beforehand, so it's like to try to plan for if you're in that scenario where there might be something that's improvisational based, like if you are a disabled artist, right, and you're working in this environment, you say like, okay, so just to like pre-plan. So if this happens, like just know that I'm a deaf artist, and the ASL there has to be an ASL interpreter there, and just like strategize with everyone, make it clear to the ASL interpreter that there might be some improv that needs to be done. I mean, it's been my experience that if you hire theatrical ASL interpreters, they're pretty awesome in terms of adaptation. Again, like they like to have the script in advance, particularly if it's like a hard script like Shakespeare or classical text. Like, yeah, you want to have but in terms of doing improv, I've worked with so many ASL interpreters as a consultant. I don't see any. I wouldn't, as long as everybody's on the same page in the room. Yeah. So that would be my suggestion.
And
Thank you.
The one thing I would add is that I think it's also on us to kind of assess our own. Maybe not ableism, but the way we've always done things. Because I just started having captions, as I said, and they needed the lyrics ahead of time to put them in the thing. And I don't really like picking my sets ahead of time. Like, I don't enjoy knowing exactly what I'm going to play. But I'm like, if I actually want to be accessible, maybe I just have to get over that and give them the set list. And so I'm trying to think of different ways. So I was like, well, maybe I could have people put in requests the week ahead, and then I could build my set list based on those requests. So it's not the same every week, but I can still be accessible. Or maybe there's a way to send them every possible song that I could play. And if it's the same captioner every week, we could like have it easily pulled up. But there's got to be a way. But I think access has to prioritize in some ways, to be honest, because I'm asking venues to step up and build ramps. In some ways, access does have to be prioritized over my desire to go free and easy. Like, you know what I mean? If I really believe in that, which I do. So it's just how do you keep the idea of artistic freedom and yet make sure that you're not excluding people. It's maybe something we have to learn how to do that we haven't done yet, and that's okay.
And I think that this is what is so beautiful about humans, is that we are infinitely more creative than we've ever imagined. Like, we are able to come up with the most creative adaptations and strategies if we allow ourselves to dream and imagine. So I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give you each a chance to close out by giving a bit of a statement on action. What is it that you are really hoping that for all of the producers, the sound engineers, the board of directors, the music festival organizers, everybody who's listening and tuning in and engaging with this panel today, what is one thing that you hope that they will do following this panel in support of disabled, deaf, and mad artists and audiences? Yeah, what is it that you'd like to see in terms of action from people?
I wrote some stuff down because this is like my big thing, and I want to go quickly to give Gaelynn and Louis time. So I'm just probably going to just go fairly quickly. So my number one thing would be an active ally, right? So we're probably talking to a lot of disabled artists, like in this conversation, but we're probably talking to a lot of non-disabled artists and creatives in this audience, right? So I'm saying be an active ally, support the work of deaf, disabled, and mad artists, right? Like actively support it. So book these artists, book these musicians, right? In your venues. And secondarily, refuse to support work that appropriates the lived experience of disability. Now, this might fall outside of the purview of music specifically. It's in my industry as an actor, it's, as you all know, it's prevalent. The surest way to win an Oscar is to play a disabled character as a non-disabled actor, right? So I'm saying refuse as an active ally. Refuse to support the work of non-disabled, non-mad, non-deaf artists, right? Refuse to support the work that, appropriating those lived experience. Don't refuse to support the work that's not appropriated. Just refuse to support work that's appropriated. And the third thing that ties into that is to refuse to support work that perpetuates stereotypes about disabled people, about deaf people, about mad people, right? So in terms of music, it's sort of not my area of expertise, but I'm thinking like any work that that's ableist, that you see as ableist, whether it's not accessible, whether the content of the music is, throwing shade on disabled people or using disabled people as a tool for symbolism or anything like that, like refuse to support it, I guess, is what I'm saying, is support the disability specific work that empowers disability culture and disability justice, and refuse to support the other. And by refuse to support, I mean actively refuse to support. Don't buy it. Don't see it. Encourage your friends not to buy it or see it, because it's the only way that we're going to, and if you're a producer or a venue owner, make your venues accessible so Gaelynn and Louise can do their work without having to constantly expend emotional labor, and they can just go in and do what they do so brilliantly.
Thank you so much. Those are such juicy points to think on. Gaelynn, Louise, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I would really like to see artists without disabilities refuse to play at inaccessible venues. Like, just stop doing it, because how fast would it be if all of a sudden nobody could book anyone if their venue wasn't accessible? It would change so much faster. And I want to see that, and I want to see it soon. Because it gets old, and I know that I can't judge other people, but I know that there are disabled artists that also still play at inaccessible venues. And just looking at the wider picture of what our goal is universal access. Like, we also have to stop doing that. We have to make sure that our shows are accessible too. So it's not just on able-bodied people, but it is definitely, they are part of the solution. And then the other thing I would say is call out ableist language when you hear it. I've struggled a lot with that in the press. Like, she suffers from a disability. It didn't look like she'd be able to do anything with her life until she found music, and all these terrible, just ridiculous sayings. And I think that until we paint disability as a real form of culture and diversity rather than like a barrier to be overcome, we're not going to see the kind of change we want, because people aren't going to identify themselves with that group or see that group as valuable enough to really put in the work. And so changing the cultural dialogue about the way we talk about disability is something we can all do. Like, think about our own language. I've had to reevaluate my language over the years too. So it's not like you're immune from this if you're disabled. So I think just realizing, are you adding negative connotation to any of the ways you're talking about disability, and how can you change that? And then just make sure that whatever you're doing, whether you're in a boardroom or a stage, that you have someone, as you said, Christine, at the table with a disability. And it doesn't have to always be physical disabilities. We should be, we're 25% of the population. So I'd like to see a world where the people in positions of power are actually reflective of what America looks like. So I'm not saying you have to have 100% disabled people on your board, although I would not complain. But I mean, like, at least 25% though, right? Because that's what's reality in America. And so, like, therefore, just make your board room look like America, you know? And that's a pretty easy way to look at it to me. And maybe I'm not right, but that's what I would like to see it. So, Luis, do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to thank both of you for those observations. And I also want to say to any event organizer, journalist, people that are proactive to divulging occasions, don't use people with disability as your interest or your lucrative purpose or the reason for your event to gain profile. So, for example, let's hire so and so. He's a singer, but he's you know, with a disability, and yeah, we'll take pictures of him, and we'll, you know, have a lot of press and this and that, and it's going to gain notoriety for our event. That's a no for me. On a more neutral thing or note, I think there should be some opportunities created where we, as the people that need services, can go in and test certain scenarios, whether it's, you know, with computers or with motor skill devices, things like that, just for us to go and test them and try and facilitate some for the developers, right? Just be facilitators for the developers, and I think that would help the things that we need that will be created, that will be more accurate and fall into our needs. You know, it's in conclusion, it takes two to make things work. So on our side, as we're doing, is making people aware, and from the other side, the people that are that should, you know, people should take these things seriously and help us by you know, advancing in their developments, and, you know, taking the time to paint the disability thing as something that's part of the essential things that make us advance in life, and everybody. It's a win-win situation.
Yes. Syrus,
thank you so much.
Syrus, can I just put a label on what Luis just said about, you know, using us to sort of advance your cause? Like, we are not your inspiration porn. Please do not use us as inspiration porn to sell tickets, to sell, you know, papers or your online whatever, right? We're not. And I don't know if folks know about, there was a amazing disability activist in Australia who passed away a few years ago. Her name was Stella Young, and she has a TED Talk, about a 9-minute TED Talk that she made a couple of years before she died. She was a brilliant comedian. That's all about inspiration porn. So I would encourage everybody to go look up Stella Young on YouTube and watch her video, her TEDx talk on inspiration porn, because it encapsulates what we've all been talking about.
And that idea that disability itself, first of all, it doesn't mean that your life sucks if you're disabled. That's kind of what Stella was saying, is I'm not your inspiration because my life doesn't suck, and I don't need you to look at me and feel bad and feel good about yourself, right? But beyond that, our lives are actually really cool, and our culture is really cool. So getting beyond inspiration porn to just like celebrating it the way you celebrate other forms of diversity, that's like, to me, the next frontier is like we're beyond removing barriers, and we're getting into actually celebrating the uniqueness of disabled art, and I want to see that happen in my lifetime for sure.
I think that is such a beautiful note to close on, in our lifetime, right? So what we know is that disabled, mad, and deaf lives are inherently valuable. It matters that we exist. We are important and essential to life on this planet, and that our participation in society is essential to a beautiful, functioning, inclusive society, right? So we know that disabled lives are inherently valuable. We matter, and it matters that we are part of this community. And so what I want to thank you all so much for just illustrating today all of the many ways that our personhood, that our beings are needing support and nourishment in the arts. I want to thank you for all of the thoughts that you've given around the kinds of structural changes that can happen, and just what audience members who are participating in this panel can do in order to push for that accessible future that we have. So I want to say that we're working towards. I want to say thank you again to Gaelynn Lea. Thank you to Christine Bruno, and thank you to Louise Orbegoso. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for what you shared. Thank you to the person who's doing the captioning, and thank you to Global Toronto for having this conversation as part of the festival. May we always have online spaces to gather. May we always be able to create work from our beds and from our homes, and may we always be united together in working for an inclusive, accessible future that is working for all of us. Until we're free, thank you all so much for what you've offered.
Thank you, Syrus.
And thank you, Syrus. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good day.